his past. At this moment, there is no way he could know.
I feel like these types of video essays tend to have a sort of format they like to follow. Usually folks come in with a game, movie, comic, etc. that most people watching haven't heard of, and the few that have all cheer because someone is finally talking about that thing they've been going bananas over for who knows how long. The intro especially is key because it sets a tone, with a smidge of hyperbole here and a dash of dramatic language there. Every game you've never heard of suddenly becomes a cult classic, a hidden gem, an overlooked masterpiece that more people need to play. Otherwise, what are you even doing with your life? Now that makes this a bit awkward, because for all intents and purposes, Lost Odyssey should fit that bill. It's a relatively forgotten JRPG from the late aughts, published by Microsoft of all companies, as they desperately made a grab for the Japanese market's attention by making a deal with Mistwalker, the studio arguably best known for being founded by the father of Final Fantasy himself, Hironobu Sakaguchi. In a lot of ways, it feels like the next logical step after Final Fantasy X, which led to many outlets at the time branding it the Lost Final Fantasy game. They also tended to call it the true Final Fantasy XIII, because everyone just loves to bash on Final Fantasy XIII. So, Tyler, my dear NB, says what is the problem? And the problem, my delightfully hypothetical inquirer, is that I didn't really like Lost Odyssey. Some of the systems are conceptually interesting, such as how the way experience scaling is handled so that you don't really need to grind, and also an ability system that encourages regularly switching up your party composition, which is kinda cool, but a lot of the execution ended up playing into some of my pet peeves, and that made the actual battles feel a bit more like a slog than anything else. In addition, the main story and characters felt fairly standard. It was fun at times for sure, and there was definitely some cool moments, but nothing really stuck with me. With the exception of the character Seth, who I love with all of my heart.
There's always something.
But there was one thing that throughout my 45-odd-hour playthrough that I came to adore. Something that, no matter how bored or annoyed I got at the story or gameplay, I was able to look forward to. And that, viewers, was the more than 30 short stories detailing some of the many adventures that our immortal protagonist Kaim has been on. Without further ado, welcome one and all to Lemalian. Let's talk about some dreams. A bit more groundwork before I can really dig in, though. As mentioned, Lost Odyssey follows Kaim, who is just one of a handful of immortals in the game. And for reasons relating to the main story, when things kick off, Kaim has lost most of his memories relating to the last 1,000 years he's been kicking it around the world. This is where the dreams come in. As you play through the game, Kaim comes across situations and people that remind him of things in his past. A brief scene plays out, and you are alerted that there is a new memory that Kaim can relive. These memories are presented as dreams, and can be accessed either when Kaim first remembers them, or by sleeping at an inn, which is a fun little touch. These dreams take the form of short stories and are very much set up in a sound novel format. Text with accompanying music and imagery that is intended to enhance the story as it plays out. They also sometimes do really cool things with the text itself, having words fall into place to represent tears or rain, for example, or having a number tick up to emphasize the passage of time. It's a nice touch and really helped pull me into the stories in a way that just reading static text on the screen might not have. However, there are a few faults to the format. Aside from many players understandably not being that interested in reading walls of text when they just want to play a game, the way they're doled out does sometimes do them a disservice. Once Kaim makes his way to the first town, it's possible to encounter around a half dozen of these stories in a very short span of time, and if you're not prepared, the front-loading can easily overwhelm and lead you to dismiss them outright because of just how much they can grind the pacing to a halt. In fact, the first time I booted up Lost Odyssey nearly a decade ago, that was something that happened to me, and one of the contributing factors to me stopping back then, before finally picking it up a couple months ago. Though that's in no way a fault of the stories themselves. On the contrary, Kiyoshi Shigematsu, the writer Mistwalker brought in to pen them, managed to fill out the world and the character of Kaim in a way that made me care about both, something the rest of the game struggled to do. The way they do this is by taking us to corners of the world that would otherwise have gone ignored. This is honestly an issue I have with a lot of JRPGs. The heroes are on a world-saving adventure, but the world always feels incredibly small. They traipse across whole-ass continents, but only ever see a dozen or so towns, with governments, cultures, and peoples that can often feel a tad lacking in depth and history. This is where things like codices come into play in Western RPGs, providing optional world-building bits for the diehards that can be freely skipped by those more interested in just getting to the game. Lost Odyssey stories are very much like this, but it's the human element inherent to its narrative format compared to the more encyclopedia-esque stylings of its codex cousins that truly let the world breathe in a way that has me still thinking about it. Take, for example, the tale of the Upstreamers. In this world, there's an area where incredible winds blow constantly from east to west. As far as anyone knows, these winds have always been there, and because of this, a religion has arisen centered on them. Members of this religion are known as Upstreamers, and these people spend their lives marching westward into the winds with the goal of eventually reaching their source. They have no worldly possessions, but do take on partners and have children. Should they die along the way, they are buried where they fall, their journey remembered, marked for all who may follow in their footsteps. Littering these windswept plains are small towns where upstreamers rest during the season when the winds are at their worst. It's during this time that some upstreamers choose to stay in town rather than heading back out once the windier season ends. Perhaps they feel it's time to take it easy and relax in their old age, or maybe they've met someone and stay behind to live their life with their new partner. Meanwhile, others may join in the endless trek, possibly looking for a change from their static life in town, or desiring a sense of adventure. There is no animosity expressed for those that stray from the path of the upstreamer, nor for those who join part way. All paths differ, twisting and winding as they may, and this particular story sees Kaim encounter a young girl who really embodies that. When they first meet, she is part of a family of upstreamers, but the next time Kaim comes around, she's older and has decided to settle down with her new husband in one of the communities, opting to let her family continue on without her. Then, in the final section of the story, we learn that later in life she took on the mantle of upstreamer once more, though she has since passed away. We learn this from her grandson, who is carrying on his grandmother's legacy as he continues ever onward into the wind. I love this story. I don't really have a better way to put it. It does so much for this world that otherwise wouldn't be there. I mean, just take the upstreamers themselves. How often are religious organizations in games not presented as a source of conflict for the main characters? In JRPGs especially, there's a reason why the small-town spiky-haired hero going on to kill God is a running joke. Lost Odyssey is a bit of an outlier in that sense, since religion doesn't really play into the narrative. There's a sense of spirituality and an acknowledged belief in the afterlife, but there's no real formal organization, and only a couple rituals that one might associate with religious beliefs. While this is refreshing precisely because of the overuse of religion as villains in these types of games, the overall lack of religious representation can lead to the world feeling a bit like it's not fully painted in. And that's what makes upstreamers so damn compelling. They are a religious group, but not in the way we're used to. They pose no threat, they aren't even that large or organized. I mean, it's not like Kaim can travel across the ocean to a different continent and encounter more upstreamers. They are isolated to this specific region, and they're just doing their thing. They exist, that's it. That's their only purpose in this story, and it's kind of fucking cool. Religions in games often act as a driving force in one way or another. If it's not Yevon trying to keep the world in endless cycle of destruction in Final Fantasy X, then it's the Chantry spreading its tendrils all across Thedas in Dragon Age. Religions are rarely ever allowed to just be a thing that's there to add color to the world. Or if they are, they don't really carry the sense of history and purpose that the upstreamers do. Purpose that comes from the way their story is told, by seeing one woman's life as she drifts in and out and back into the life of an upstreamer. We come to understand the appeal of the religion. Even if they will never reach the source of the winds, this isn't the point. They feel a calling, a reason to journey, and that's all they need. And so many of Lost Odyssey's stories do this kind of thing. They highlight these small corners of the world that could have easily just been glossed over, and in fact are in the main story. We learn about portraitists of the dead who are paid to paint people just as they're breathing their final breath, and who aren't considered experts in their craft until they're able to paint one of their own family members. We also learn about an island whose inhabitants were mercilessly slaughtered by a neighboring country, and now anyone who tries to go there is driven mad because of the way the winds blow through the rocks and foliage sounds like the death elegies islanders used to sing. Oh, and we can't forget the general who eradicated every aspect of his foes down to their friends and family in order to stamp out any and all possibility of revenge. But then he was killed in his own tent by a flower that is said to embed itself in those who nurture hatred in their hearts, leaving nothing but a crimson garden blooming in his wake. Even with all of this delicious world-building goodness, it's the people in these stories that turn them into compelling and at times heart-aching narratives. And while the casts may change from tale to tale, there remains one constant thread binding them all together. It's Kaim, our hero. He doesn't see much growth or characterization in the main game. He starts out pretty stoic and broody, and he does kind of liven up a bit later on, but the bulk of his characterization is reserved for the dreams. One of the best examples of this is in the village closest to heaven. Now, deep in the mountains, there lies a small village that bears many children. It's not uncommon for births to near double digits for one family, and this is because the people in this village all die young, inexplicably and without warning. Most children don't make it past the age of 6, and the fact that someone once made it all the way to 50 is a miracle. While on his travels, Kaim is flagged down by a young man who requests his help. This young man is an inhabitant of this village, and it's his job to make his way through the snow to a frozen lake where he'll chip off some of the ice to bring back to his home. Normally he has a partner to assist him, but said partner died recently at the ripe old age of 19. Kaim agrees to help, and the two set off. Along the way, the young man telling Kaim of his village and the many lives and deaths that occur there. The new life is set to join it, in fact, as the young man and his wife are expecting their first child any day now. Now, when the two reach their destination, the young man reveals that the ice here is unique. It takes a long time to melt, and it's said that eating it provides an energy boost, which may be why he's been burning through piece after piece all along the way. It helps that there's a sweetness to the ice, the flavor likened to candy. The young man offers some to Kaim, who instantly recognizes that sweetness. It's poison. You see, in the past, there was a mine that belched a poisonous gas from within its depths, and over time, this poison leaked out into the nearby river, where it wound its way downstream before settling into this lake bed, seeping into the groundwater and infecting the spring. While any mortal who might remember the mine and be able to warn the inhabitants has long since passed away, Kaim has not, and yet he says nothing. As they ready to head back, the sound of a bell tolls, and this bell for the village pulls double duty, as it commemorates both births and deaths. Now, the young man knows what this means. It's a signal that his child has been born, and is in this moment of joy, just as he's wishing his child a long life, that he dies, falling lifeless to the snow. Kaim returns with the young man's body in tow, only to find not sorrow, but smiles greeting him. His death, along with the child's birth, are greeted in much the same way. Kaim watches as the newly widowed wife pops a piece of ice candy into her baby's mouth, and then he leaves without a word. Boy, man, where do I begin? After reading this story for the first time, I felt no small amount of discomfort. In most cases, it's pretty easy to agree with Kaim's actions. He is, by and large, someone who wants to help and often uses his centuries of experience to do just that. This time, though, I just couldn't, which is part of the reason why I've been thinking about this story for weeks at this point. And with all my musings, meanderings, and ponderings, I think I kind of finally understand why Kaim did what he did. As mentioned, Kaim is immortal, and while this fact is woven into the fabric of the stories in one way or another, it's here where the way immortality has shaped his sense of morality really shines through. People whose lives are finite inevitably find value in duration. All must end, so we all strive to eke out just one more day, doing anything and everything we can to stave off death for as long as humanly possible. But Kaim's not like us. He's seen centuries of people doing just that, fighting the end only for it to come regardless. He's had to witness the devastation that so often accompanies death more times than we can count. He recognizes that mortals put so much focus on fighting death that they're never really ready when the time does come. And yet, he finds that in this one village, that's not the case. Here, that inevitability is struck home every single day, with every child lost and every partner buried. Villagers here cannot escape it, and so they've chosen to embrace it. This can be seen in how birth and death are blurred in the village. From the bell being used as signal both occasions to the way the villagers react the same way, regardless of whether someone has recently died or someone's been born. Heck, the symbolism can't get much clearer than the way the man dies literally moments after the birth of his child. The two events are not two at all. There is no sense of birth, life, death all being separate here. Rather, they are all seen as one. Everything is so close in proximity time-wise that this closeness has permeated every aspect of the villagers' lives, rituals, and attitudes. Death will come, but because of their unique circumstances, it's quick, it's painless, and it's warm. And Kaim can't bring himself to rob them of that. To tell them the truth might prolong their lives just a bit more, but it would reintroduce that sense of fear, as death would once more become an adversary that must be fought back, rather than something that's just accepted as one more piece of the whole that is life. All that said, I still don't agree with Kaim, but I'm okay with that. In fact, I welcome it. Someone who is immortal shouldn't have the same sense of morals and views on life and death as someone like me who will be peacing out in around 80 years if they're lucky. Kaim should be informed by how his existence differs from mortals, and the fact that his experiences have been factored into the story makes it that much more fucking cool. And while this may be the best example of that, it's far from the only one. There are numerous other stories amongst the many in this game that portray how Kaim's differing kind of attitudes on life and experiences affect him and how he handles people. And some of my favorites being watching as Kaim uses his experience with loss to comfort a young girl as she lies on her deathbed. And another being seeing how Kaim's unique perception of time leads him to be the only mercenary to understand why a small village might want to hire someone to protect a bunch of cicadas that won't even show up for another 75 years, long after most of the people living there are dead and gone. And that's the thing about these stories. They all color in Kaim and his world in a way that is just at once devastating and wonderful. The life of an immortal is not easy, and at many points, Kaim sees his immortality as a curse or a burden. But in these words, these tales, that we see how that's not all it is. He's seen countless deaths, friends and partners and children, but he's also seen the passage of time erode bigotry and hate. And it's just, all of this wrapped together makes the world Kaim inhabits such a fascinating place, and he as a character is equal to that in every measure. While I do wish some of these experiences and this nuance had been able to been incorporated into the main game rather than just being sequestered away into these short stories, in the end that doesn't really matter. I'm just happy these stories exist at all and that I got to experience them, and I wholly recommend seeking them out if you can. They are all available on the Lost Odyssey wiki, and heck, even seek out Lost Odyssey 2 while you're at it. It didn't really vibe with me, but if you're into JRPGs, I recommend checking it out. But definitely look for the short stories. They are fantastic, and I love them. They are some of my favorite pieces of world building and characterization in JRPGs, and maybe even games in general, and I think more people should read them because they deserve it. And now for the unscripted portion of the video. Hello, welcome to Lemullion, a little space where I talk about cool shit I see in video games. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking it through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video, the first one of hopefully many. I'm looking to be doing this about once a month or so look out for July's video coming up sometime. But until then, you know what? Go pet a dog, pet a cat. You got little lizards, pet them too. Just give the little guys some love for me. Until next time, take care, everyone.